welcome to Percentages of Amounts with Cubits Education. In this lecture, we're going to understand percentages in more detail and finding percentages of amounts. So there's a few things that I would like you to remember or write down as you're taking your notes. So feel free to pause the video at any time to write these things down. So first of all, percentages are all based on 100. They're all out of 100. Okay, and they can be written as fractions, but we'll come back to that soon. So 20% means basically 20 out of 100. It's the same as saying 20 pence in a pound. When we use terms like half and a quarter, we can relate these to percentages. So if we think about the number 100, 1/2 of 100 is 50. That's why 50% is equivalent to a half. So the same can apply for a quarter. If we found a quarter of 100, it gives us 25, which is why 25% is equivalent to a quarter. When finding percentages, we can sometimes use the fractions we know to make it easier. Let's say, what is 50% of 300, for example? Well, we know that 50% is the same as a half, so we can just half 300. So if we half 300, that gives us 150. When we say half 300, I mean split it into 2. It's always being split into the number that's on the bottom of the fraction. So as I said earlier, we also know that 25% is equal to a quarter. And that's because a quarter of 100 is 25. To find a quarter, we divide by 4, okay? Because again, it's on the bottom of this fraction here. 100 divided by 4 is 25, giving us 25%. So if I wanted to know what 25% of 400 was, I know that I can just divide 400 by 4, giving me 100. Another way of finding a quarter is to half a number and half it again. Because let's say you had a piece of a whole pizza. If you halved it, you'd cut it down the middle. And if you quartered it, you would cut it down the middle the other way, horizontally, for example. So if I had the number 600 and I wanted to find a quarter of 600, I would half it, giving me 300, and I'd half it again, giving me 150. So it's quite easy to quarter something. We half it and half it again. You probably remember that from school. So coming back to this example then, we can say that because a quarter is 25%, we can say that 25% of 400 is 100. So let's have a look at finding some percentages. Now this is quite a simple way of finding percentages, but some people get it confused because there's quite a few steps. But it's all common sense if you just pay attention. So let's say we're going to find 30% of 20. Okay, so 30% of 20 means that we're going to try and split up 20 into 100 pieces and then find 30 of them. So we would have to do 20 divided by 100 and then times it by 30. There's a quick way to do that though. Instead of dividing by 100 and finding 1%, we can divide by 10 and find 10%. So 10% of 20 is 2, because when I divide a number by 10, I just take off the 0. So 10% of 20, I just take off the 0, it gives me 2. So that means that if 10% is 2, then 20% must be 4, because 20 is double 10 and 4 is double 2. Then if I wanted 30%, well here I've got 10 and 20, and 10 add 20 makes 30, so 2 add 4 makes 6. So 30% of 20 is 6. Okay, so there's another way of doing this. So instead of finding 10%, which to me is quite an easy way, if we go back to the previous example, let's say I wanted to find 40%, I'm just going to add on another 10, or 50%, or 60%. You're just adding constantly until you get to the amount that you need. In this example, I'm going to do the same question, but I'm going to use a different method. So instead of just finding 10%, I'm going to find 1%. And remember that percent means out of 100. So to find 1%, I have to divide 20 by 100. Now, you shouldn't have to do that on a calculator, because when you divide by 100, all you do is go back 2 decimal places, okay, and my decimal point would go here. So I'd end up with 0.2. Can you see my decimal point is? I have to put a 0 point in front of it. Now there's no point putting this 0 on the end because it doesn't actually mean anything. So we don't actually need it. So 0.2 would be our answer. Okay, so 1% of 20 is 0.2. I don't want one of them though, I want 30 of them. So now I'm having to do 0.2 times 30. This is one of them, 1%, and I want 30 of them. I'm going to times by 30, and that gives me 6. Okay, so you can use a calculator for some of these, but then I would really get used to multiplying decimals, which there is a video on that. So I hope you found that multiplication okay. Okay, so the first way was to find 10% and then add on 10% or times by 3 or something like that. So, for example, you could have found 10% and just kept adding on 10% until you found the amount that you needed. This example is a bit of a different rule. Divide by 100. Okay, so we would divide this number by 100 and then times by the percentage that we have. Okay, some people find this the easiest one, but at GCSE you're not always allowed a calculator, so it's better to find multiple ways of finding percentages. Okay, so in this rule, divide by 100 times by how many percentages there are. Okay, so one other way, and this is definitely going to be a calculator method, depending on how good you are with decimals. So another way of doing this is we can write 30% as a decimal, and we did do a video on this. Can you remember when I said 30% is like 30 pence? Okay, if you've got £0 but 30 pence, you can write it like this. There's no point putting the 0 on the end because it's not actually 30 pence and it doesn't mean anything, that 0. So it's just 0.3. And all I would do is 0.3 times 20, and that gives me 6. So what you're doing essentially is just cutting out the previous rule, the divide by 100, because technically you've already divided by 100 to turn this into a decimal. Okay, so 0.3 times 20 equals 6. Okay, so to find any percentage, you can still use the rule divide by 100 and multiply by the percentage being asked. Okay, so let's try this one. What is 60% of 300? So we're going to go through all 3 methods now. So 60% of 300, let's look at using the 10% method for this one. So I know that 10% of 300 is 30, because whenever I find 10%, I just take off the 0 on the end. Okay, either that or I go back 1 decimal place. But there is a video on dividing by 10 and 100 and 1,000, so I suggest you watch it. 60% means then that I'll take my 10%, my 30, and I'll times it by 6, and it gives me 180. So that's my answer. However, to stop yourself from getting confused, you could write down all of them. So you could say, right, well, I know that 10% is 30 because I just take off the 0. So 20% must be double to give me 60. 30% must be triple to give me 90. 40% must be quadruple, or you can just double the 20%, because double 20 is 40 and double 60 is 120. 50%, well, 50% is an easy one because you're just going to half this number, because 50% is a half. Okay, and then 60%. Well, if I know 50% already, I can just add on the 10%. Okay, so it's basically just going up in tens. So double, triple, quadruple, times by 5, times by 6. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, technically 6. Okay, so 180. The next method is using the 1%. So 1% of 300 is 3, because when we find 10%, we take off 1 0, but when we find 1%, we take off 2 zeros. Okay, so then all I need to do is, because I found 1%, which is 3, and I actually want 60 of them, I do 3 times 60. Well, 3 times 6 is 18, and then I just add on the 0. Okay. Final one is using our multiplier, our decimal. 60% as a decimal is 0.6, okay? And then we just do 0.6 times 300, and that is 180. And you can use a calculator for these ones if you struggle with multiplying decimals. Most of the time, your percentage questions shouldn't be too hard, especially at foundation. But if you can't multiply decimals, then the higher tier paper might not be for you anyway, so don't panic. Your foundation questions shouldn't be too difficult in terms of that. Okay, now there's just a few other things that I want to go through. So these are just a few simple percentages and fractions that we should know. And if you don't know them, I suggest that you write them down and learn them. So a half is 50%, a quarter is 25%, a third is 33.3%. But actually, we should have a dot here because that dot stands for reoccurring, and reoccurring means it's going to go on and on and on forever. If you put in a third or 1 divided by 3 on your calculator, you will get this number and it will go on and on and on and on and on. It won't ever stop. Okay? And then we have a fifth, which is 20%, and 3/4, which is 75%. If you put any of these on your calculator and do 1 divided by 2, 1 divided by 4, 1 divided by 3, 1 divided by 5, 3 divided by 4, yeah, you'll get the decimal version of these. So if you did this on your calculator, 1 divided by 2, you get 0.5, and then all you'd need to do is times it by 100 to give you the 50. We have gone over that in a previous video, so I hope you're confident with that now. Okay, but this one, you really need to know all of these. These are the simplest ones that you should remember. You shouldn't have to think about what 20% is as a fraction. Okay, so these are just the explanations. If you want to pause the video and read those yourself, you can. It's basically just saying what I've just said. So 3/4 of 100 is 75. So 3/4 is the same as 75%. Okay, so when we find 3/4 of 100, which again, you've already seen the video for that, 100 divided by 4 times by 3 gives me 75. Okay, so pause the video if you want to write those down, but I'm going to move on myself. Okay. Okay, so again, 1 over 10, 10%, 1 over 100, 1%, 2 over 5, 40%, and 3 over 5, 60%. Okay, so these are ones that I want you to learn by heart. Okay, learn by heart. So you don't want to get to a question and think, I don't know what 3/5 is. Learn these ones by heart. And also, you might find that you're better when it comes to the sales, and you can figure things out quicker. You know, oh, 20% off, what's that? Oh, well, you know, if it's a £20 dress, I know that 10% is 2 and 20% must be 4, so I get £4 off, so it's only going to cost me £16. Okay, you might be quicker in the shops at doing that. Okay, so pause the video now and have a go at these questions, and then I'll go through the answers, okay? Okay, if you've paused the video and had a go, let's go through these answers. So we have 60% of 130, that's 78, okay? So you could have found 10% first, which was 13, and then times by 6, or whichever method you found the most useful. 496, 75, 325, 90, and 210.6. So I get for some of them you might have wanted to use a calculator. I'm hoping for at least the first 5 you didn't, and only on this last one that you might have, depending on your skills. Okay, if you are struggling with the percentage methods, please go back and watch the video again as many times as you want. And obviously, as I've said before, if you're doing this as part of your GCSE course, then please take advantage of the free lessons that you get included in that. So, what is 0.5% of 120? So, this one sounds a little bit tricky, but really it's not so bad. 0.5%, if you can remember, means a half of a percent. To find 1%, we have to divide this by 100. Okay, 1% of 120 is 120 divided by 100. Okay, you've just written it down as well. Okay, 1 over 100 is 1%. Okay, so if I divide it by 100, I just take my decimal point back 2 places. So I'm going to go 1, 2, and my decimal point will go there, and that will make it 1.2 as we have here. Okay, so that's 1%. If 1% is 1.2, 0.5 must be half of that because 0.5 is a half. So half of 1.2 is 0.6. You could also think about this as like 12, and you know that half of 12 is 6, but obviously it's not 12, it's 1.2, so you have to write it as 0.6. Okay? What about this one then? 3.3% of 7. And this is where we get tricky now. Okay, so we can easily do this using our 1% rule that we learned earlier. So we're going to find 1% of the number. Okay, so 1% of 7 is 7 divided by 100. That's how we find it, giving us 0.7. And then to find 3.3%, okay, because I don't want 1%, which is this, I need to times it by 3.3. So 0.07 times 3.3, and I will let you do that one on your calculator, is 0.231. Okay? So just be careful when finding the 1%, it's divide by 100, and then times by how many we have here, how many we need here. Okay, that works for any percentage. So 3.3% of 7 is 0.231. Okay, let's try this one, 26.5. Again, I'm just going to find 1% of 32. 1% of 32 is 32 divided by 100. Can anyone guess what that might be? It's 0.32. Remember, we just take our decimal point back 2 spaces when we divide by 100. Okay, so then to find 26.5%, this is 1%, so I need to multiply it by 26.5. Again, you can use your calculator. So that gives us 8.48. So 8.48 is 26.5% of 32. Right, so have a go at some of these, either using any of the rules that you like. For now, you can use the 1% rule, you can use the multiplier rule, but the multiplier rule, it might not be a great idea to use it because you will need a calculator for the most part. Whereas if you can do some without a calculator, I would have a go. Okay, so pause the video and I'll go through the answers. Okay, so if you've paused the video and had a go, 63% of 450 is 283.5. 21% of 500 is 105. 37% of 890 is 329.3. 12.5% of 600 is 75. 17.5% of 420 is 73.5. And 29.2% of 200 is 58.4. Okay, so I hope you did well on those. They were tricky questions. You got some tricky answers in there. Okay, so we're just going to have a look at one more task now. And I do want you to use the decimal or multiplier rule for this. I want you to use a calculator, and you've got 5 questions to have a go at, okay? So don't forget, when I say use the calculator, like the multiply method, you're going to put this into a decimal. Okay, just to give you a quick hint if you can't remember. 21% is 0.21. And you'll just do 0.21 times 500. Okay? Okay, so pause the video and have a go, and then I'll go through the answers. Okay, so let's go through them. So we do 0.21 times 500, that gives us 105. The next one, 0.37 times 890, 329.3. So we're doing the same questions again, but we're just using the multiplier method. 12.5% of 600, 0.125. Now just be careful with this one. When we're putting it as a decimal, you have to move the decimal point from where it is 2 spaces back, okay, not from the end of the number. It's only when there's no decimal around that we start at the end of the number. 0.175 times 420, 73.5, and 0.292 times 200 equals 58.4. Okay, now again, they were quite tricky. I feel like I've kind of confused myself, so please get in touch and let me know if there's anything that you need me to go through that I've missed out, or if you just need me to explain it in a different way, or if there was too much information in one video and you need me to break it up. Please comment, leave me an email at info@cubaeducation.com, comment on the video, on the course, go to the website and send a message, anything, because I want them to be right for you and I want you to be learning from the videos, not feeling more confused. Okay, so thank you for using Cuba Education and I'll see you next time.